This is part 2 of a workshop called Kundalini Energy and Christian Spirituality, given at the Spiritual Life Center of the Diocese of Wichita on August 12, 1991, by Philip St. Romain. The material covered in part 1 of the workshop, which was the story of Philip's Christian life of prayer and the awakening of Kundalini, is available in a slightly different format as Christian Prayer and Kundalini.
I wanted to give you the experiential sharing because I think a lot of data is there. And that way we're not talking about something out of a merely theoretical kind of basis. And I like to share it too because I'm aware that there are some of you who have had some of this going on. And I'm also aware of how grateful I was in my life to read accounts of others who, shared something of their journey. One of the reviews that the book has gotten, I've been told, I haven't read it, but I've been told that the Jesuit who reviewed it raised the question, aren't people who have these kind of things go on kind of supposed to shut up about it? I thought people who had that, sort of those who know don't say, or something like that. And I'm just glad that others have written and talked about the spiritual journey, not as an accomplishment, but just a sharing. I really see this as a human developmental phenomenon that is there for many. It's certainly no testimony to me because I know what God started with. Started with a little Cajun boy who wanted to hunt and fish, And so to see there's some possibilities there, some possibilities. Okay. Going to begin a little story Anthony DeMello tells about a man who was crying, and his son went up to him and said, "Dad, what are you crying about?" He said, "Our factory has burned down. Our factory has been destroyed by a fire." And the son says, "No, Dad, we sold that factory 3 days ago." And at that, the old man stopped crying. Well, what about that kind of thing? To notice how one's attention changes when our thoughts about something change. The old man is crying, because in his mind, he is sure that a calamity has fallen. And when his perception of that event changes, he changes. You're having a good day. Your attention is calm, peaceful, and a friend suddenly tells you that your pants are split in the back. What happens to your attention? Get in touch with that, if you would. Does it continue to just be here now in love and peace? You're coasting along through a nice day and suddenly discover that a loved one has fallen ill. What happens to your attention? The loved one's been ill all this time, mind you. Your pants were split all that time, mind you. When you become aware of that, what happens to your attention? It changes, doesn't it? It's certainly no great insight that what we think about something influences the way we feel about that thing. That thinking and feeling are in a kind of a dialectical relationship. That thinking affects feeling, and feeling, on the other hand, affects thinking as well. That when we are in a state of anger, for example, our thoughts tend to move in that direction. But if we begin to change our thoughts, we can begin to change something of the way we feel too. And within that dialectic between thought and feeling, there is this mysterious quality that we call attention. What in the world is that? Attention. It's so seldom talked about as a phenomenon. We so take it for granted. Attention. What is attention? This mysterious light in the soul, or the soul itself, I don't know. attention and how attention changes in this dialectical relationship between thought and feeling. I see attention, but we say attention is awareness directed toward this or that. Attention is a focusing of awareness. We could back the question up one further and say, what in the world is awareness? And I'll share something about that. What is I? Capital I. And what is its relationship to thought and feeling? Now, if I've already lost you, we're in bad shape because it gets a little heavier as we go along. I think what we call I is the subject of attention. So if you would stop and just get in touch with that. The fact, get in touch not with what you are paying attention to. That's what most people are always doing. They are external reference or focused. They are focused on the objects of attention. If you could, just in your seat, get in touch with the fact that there is attention and that you are the one who is paying attention. Let's stop and sit with that just for a minute and see what that feels like. That you can pay attention, and that you can choose to pay attention to this or that. Give that a try. Make some choices about directing your attention. Look at the back of a person's head and just briefly see it. Look at a light. Look at the floor. It's like most people are going through the day not too terribly in touch with the fact that they are the custodians of attention, their attention. They're more conscious of the things which attention is falling on, more reacting to those things. Notice how thought affects your attention, how in thinking of one thing, attention changes. And see if you can get in touch with how your energy seems to follow your attention. How energy follows attention. Eventually, it does. Think of something funny and see what kind of energy you begin to experience. See if there begins to form a smile, almost involuntarily. I'll tell you a story about a very depressed woman who came to my office a few weeks ago, and she'd been depressed for weeks. And she was going on and on about all the reasons she had to be depressed, and there were some very gloomy things in her life, for sure. And after listening to her a while, I said, now, okay, I'd like you to try something with me. Are you willing to try something that might learn something about your depression? And she says, I'll try anything. I said, okay, I would like you to look at the carpet on my floor and tell me what colors you see. She thought I was crazy. I said, try it, please do. There are many colors on that carpet, so she started to describe them. And she went on, and I kept saying, and what other color do you see? Keep looking, there are more colors. I didn't know if there were or not, but she kept looking anyway. She was looking harder and harder at the carpet. I said, now tell me what shapes you see. Describe these shapes, and describe what they suggest to you. Well, that sounded more like a psychological exercise, right? So she started looking and looking, and after about 10 minutes of that kind of nonsense, I asked her, have you been depressed in the last 10 minutes? And she says, no, I haven't. I said, where did your depression go? She said, well, I haven't the foggiest idea. I feel good. I said, you can have it back if you want. Just start meditating on those other things. And I said, what did you just learn? Well, she learned that by looking at my carpet, she lost her depression. I said, when you quit giving all that stuff so much attention, then the whole dialectic between feeling and energy that was there, she took some energy out of it. That attention is like a light, a powerful spiritual light that is at our disposal. And when we shine it on something, it has more energy, if that's making sense. So that the more attention she gave to all these situations, the more aggravated they became within her. When her attention when she was able to diffuse it a little bit, come out of that and look at something else for a little while, it quit spiraling downward, quit spiraling. So I said, now you can do that anytime you want. And I'm not saying you'll be totally relieved of your depression, but certainly it'll help to walk outside and listen to birds, to notice the color of the sky, to feel the breeze on your face. That just in using your senses, your attention will become more diffuse. And what had happened, of course, was her attention had collapsed into this little negative dialogue between thought and feeling. And they were feeding each other, feeding. And there are some reasons that was happening. I think that's true with many, many people, don't you? That a lot of their attention has collapsed into little whirlwinds of spiraling downward energy between thought and feeling. And they don't know how to get out of it either. That's part of the misery in which they live. Let's add one more ingredient to this. The way that we experience attention and energy in a body, that all that we do is in a body, and that our experiences of attention and energy are embodied. They are happening in a body that is part of the system of attention and energy. Let's try some things, okay? Let's see how fun this can be. Where do you experience the embodiment of energy and attention when you're watching a movie with a love scene? And if you want to try that, I think you probably know the answer, but if you would like to experiment with that, allow yourself to remember some passionate love scene that you've seen in a movie. And notice where the embodiment of that is experienced. And if the answer is not in the reproductive system, then you haven't seen any really good movies lately. Certainly this culture makes that opportunity available, doesn't it? Or that you're reading in Lady Chatterley's Lover, right? Where do you experience the center of attention? Where do you experience things happening? Yes, that when we get that kind of stimuli, we experience a body center where attention and energy are really cooking in the reproductive area. Where do you experience your body center for attention when you're watching a chase scene in a movie where the hero is chasing or is being chased by some crooks who are trying to kill the hero? Where do you experience that? Or Clint Eastwood is out to get the bad guys. Where do you feel your attention resting? Anybody? Tell me your answer to that. Heart is pounding, but where else? Yeah. In your stomach, yes. Any of you start to get a tight stomach? Yes. Kind of right in here, huh? Just, I was watching Big Red years ago when I was a child, and Big Red was about to jump into something, and I think he was going to get hurt if he jumped into it. Some trap they'd set for Big Red, and this boy stood up and said, "Don't jump, Big Red!" He was just coming out right there. Where do you experience your center of attention in your body, your embodied center of attention, when you're watching on the news a little child cry because their parent has been killed in an accident? And they're crying and crying, saying, "My mother, where's my mother?" Where does that happen for you? In the heart, right? Yes, you feel it in your, you really feel it. And is it a different feeling than the chase feeling? Than the love scene feeling? Yes, it's a different kind of feeling. It's a more tender, compassionate, sweet heart kind of feeling. As Sister Anne said, these are very, very natural things, aren't they? But one of the things I'm inviting you to notice here is how, when those experiences happen, there is a place where we feel more energy happening. There is like a body center that is associated with that, you see? Where do you experience your center when you're reading a book on philosophy or theology? Where do you experience your center happening? There. Right. Much more in the brain area, right? Yes. Okay. Where do you experience your center when you're just contemplating a beautiful sunset? You're just watching a beautiful sunset, and we have them in Kansas. You'll see that this evening. That's a little more difficult, isn't it? Kind of. Where? All over, yes. I mean, there might be some heart stimulation, and there might be some visual stimulation, and yes, it'll be a little more open. That's a kind of a top of the head one there. Just a looking, and there's no need to say anything. It's just looking. Beginning to experience the just looking that is a third eye kind of thing. Now, when we speak of the word, when we use the word chakra, that is what we're talking about. We're talking about the embodiment of attention and energy, or centers where energy and attention converge. Okay? That's what we mean. I mean that we have all these different experiences, and they're more concentrated in some areas and centers than others. At least that's how I like to introduce that concept. There are other ways of getting at chakras and, talking about that, and we'll get into some heavier ones. All right, let's get into a little Thomistic interpretation. Let's try to hook some of this up with the real traditional Catholicism. Would anyone in here agree that Thomistic theology is traditional enough for us? I mean, is that a traditional enough way to get at this stuff here, to say that we're not going to be too screwy New Age or something? I think St. Thomas would say that attention is a property of the soul. When he spoke of the soul, he was speaking of that aspect of our humanity that is endowed with intelligence, memory, and will, all of which have to do with experiences of attention. And he, as you know, St. Thomas spoke of two principles, matter and form. And soul belonged to what he called form. And matter was sort of the physical stuff that was given its shape by form. You didn't just have in creation matter. You had different kinds of matter. You didn't just have life, you had different kinds of life. And what gave these different kinds of life their shape or their unique property was form. And for the human being, it was a special form, a soul form, that was endowed with these qualities. I think we can say now, since Einstein too, that matter and energy kind of belong together. That energy and matter, they can go back and forth. That matter is really solid energy, isn't it? E equals mc squared. See, if you're not following, you better be closer. Right, that means what he's saying, what Einstein's saying is that like with uranium, it's pretty clear on how to convert uranium into energy. That's what the atomic bomb does. It's a little more difficult to release the atomic energy in this microphone. That's take a much more difficult kind of atomic reaction. But matter is solid energy. Energy and matter are tied up together. So here we might say again that soul is that which gives form to energy. Soul is the ability to give form to energy. It's a human property. And energy is that which allows the soul to do work, to express itself. Energy gives the soul some kind of ability to do. And so an embodied soul is one that has form and ability to do. Okay, that's a Thomistic. Pretty traditional, right? And it really works. I think there are many possibilities, and my friend Jim Mirage will explore some of the Thomistic implications of the contemplative life as we go along this week. The soul is invisible form or life principle that gives the body a shape. The body is that which allows the soul to express. The two are connected. You might say the body is the physical expression of the soul. How do you like that? And the soul is the invisible expression of the body. That's even better, isn't it? Now let's turn to another tradition, that of Hinduism, especially the Hatha Yoga people, and see what they say about these dynamics of attention and energy that we did the little exercise with. They speak, instead of just the two things, form and matter, form and energy, they would speak of different bodies that interpenetrate, moving from a physical body to a higher spiritual body. I'll talk about that briefly, because I like it. I like it a lot. I think we can use the two systems and say that the Hindu yogi system gives us a little more sophisticated view of the range of possibilities between pure matter energy on the one hand and pure form on the other. That between these two extremes, there are little levels, subtle bodies, if you will, that stand between the pure spiritual form on the one hand and the energetic experience on the other. I think the Hindu model gives us a way of understanding and even encouraging the experience of Kundalini and its integration as well. They speak of different bodies. I'll say a little bit about these bodies. Can you see that, or do I need to turn some light a bit? And the Hatha Yoga system, which is pretty much accepted in most of Hinduism, it's metaphysics. It's not always used in the same way, of course. They recognize the existence of a physical body, and we know all about that. This is what you learn about in medical school, how the physical body operates. Of course, in medical school, they tend to treat this as a machine that has learned how to think. And you'll study how the machine works. And so this would include the physical organs, the central nervous system, the various body systems, and so forth, as the physical level. Now, another level, however, and as we move up these levels, we are speaking more and more of non-physical bodies. As we go up, we're more and more non-physical, approaching pure soul form. The etheric. I'm going to read some descriptions of these from a book by Richard Gerber, no relation to Eugene, that's our bishop, called Vibrational Medicine. And it's a really good book. I learned a lot from this book. He's a medical doctor who's very much whole health oriented. The etheric body is a body which looks quite similar to the physical body, over which it is superimposed. So these bodies interpenetrate, but they are of different energy frequencies. So they can live side by side and affect one another and yet function in their own way, within their own realm, sort of like octaves on a piano. Okay? Within the etheric energy map is carried information which guides the cellular growth of the physical structure of the body. Sort of like it is the etheric body that directly affects the physical. The etheric is in fact a body of matter, The matter of which it is composed is called etheric matter or subtle matter. It is this body, for example, that people sometimes see at death when a loved one dies. They see the etheric body, which is a body that is not as dense matter as the regular physical body, but which can be seen under certain circumstances with the eyes. Or this is the body that perhaps ghosts manifest in, an etheric kind of body. The etheric body is not completely separated from the physical system with which it interacts. Ancient Chinese theory has it that the acupuncture points on the human body are points along an unseen meridian system that runs deeply throughout the tissues of the body. And through these tissues, through these meridians or energy channels, flows the qi energy, or a subtle kind of energy. Life energy, you might call it. And that acupuncture system and meridians is really the energy system of the etheric body. It more or less follows the nerves of the central nervous system, but sometimes jumps across. And as you know, acupuncture has received a lot of, it's gotten some good hard looks from the medical profession and has been found to have some credibility. That along the meridians there are greater concentrations of certain chemicals than one would expect to find. And that, sure enough, by sticking these needles in certain places, pain in a totally different part of the body is relieved. So they're onto something. The meridians formed earlier than the physical structure, that as the soul moves into an incarnation in a body, this etheric system is developed, and it helps to guide the physical development. So the spatial organization of growth from embryogenesis through adulthood is guided by a holographic energy field template known as the etheric body. If you've got that, we're on good vibrations together. Statements like that mean a lot to me. But this is a sort of a body. Now, here's something to consider too. There are people on this planet who have the ability to see these subtle bodies. Most of us do not. But there are people who can see that, and who can see a kind of an energy guidance system that is there. And so that's the etheric. And I won't get into any more great detail about that. But basically, that experience is one that acupuncture is onto. The next level, they would call the astral level. Or they can again call it the astral body. How do we understand that? Okay, again, the physical body is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Etheric is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Astral is do, re, mi, fa, sol. And you keep going higher and higher. It's the same melody, but different frequencies. So they can live together. Astral is a higher frequency. What is this astral body? Of course, you've heard of astral body travel and things like that. Sounds very spooky, right? Astral body is composed of astral matter. Statements like that aren't especially helpful to me as a scientist, by the way. I just have you know. Okay, great. Some of us would call that a redundant statement, which is a subtle substance of even higher energetic frequencies than etheric matter. So it's a higher level of matter. But remember again, matter and energy are two faces of the same thing. So to say it's a higher level of energy is also saying essentially the same thing. And if it's an energy, then it can also, in a sense, be a kind of a matter, too. So I can kind of go along with that. Because astral matter exists in a frequency band well above etheric and physical matter, it is able to occupy the same space as the physical and the etheric body. And we've made that point. What the astral center is about emotional expression. It would be what in more ordinary parlance we'd call the feeling self, or the emotional self. What is unique in this system is that it is a body. And I suspect that this is the body that in the field, which I'm certified substance abuse counseling, we call the inner child. I think would be the astral person. And Sister Anne Cecile nods. I know I'm on good ground here. Are you nodding about that one? It's an emotional kind of experience. The astral is a feeling. That is, its range of intelligence is an emotional kind of sensitivity that it has. So you have the astral body. There it is, sometimes referred to as the emotional body. It is considered to be the seat and carrier of human emotions. In other words, our emotional self is a dimension of ourself that is related to the physical self, but is not the same. And between the emotional self and the physical self, there is this etheric self, which acts as a kind of go-between. How many of you are familiar with Ayurvedic medicine, Deepak Chopra's writings, or so forth? What he calls the quantum mechanical body, I believe, is that etheric body, that level between feeling and body that we can learn to work with. And he's very interested in that because, you know, some of the implications as we go along, we see that, for example, maybe some of the diseases in the physical body don't start in the physical body. Maybe they start in higher bodies and are ultimately manifesting. So he's looking at cancer and things like that. Maybe cancer isn't just a physical problem. Maybe it's an emotional problem that is deteriorated down into a physical level, since these bodies interpenetrate and affect one another. Another name for the astral body has been the desire body or emotional body. The esoteric literature describes the astral as the seat of our sensual appetites and desires, longings, moods, feelings, appetites, and fears. I think we can relate to that. Again, psychology is certainly onto that level. Okay, another level then, the mental body, a little higher frequency. As the astral body is sometimes called the vehicle of expression of the human emotional aspects, so the mental body is the vehicle through which the self manifests and expresses the concrete intellect. This would be the concrete intellectual self. Its way of knowing, its intelligence is different. It's not a body intelligence. It's not an etheric intelligence. It's not a feeling intelligence. It's a mental intelligence. Okay? The mental body is ultimately linked to the physical body through the astral and etheric. Let's see. If the mental body is functioning properly, it allows an individual to think clearly and to focus his or her mental energies in appropriate directions with force, vigor, and clarity. Because the mental body feeds energy into the astral emotional body, which then funnels down into the etheric and physical bodies, healing a person at the mental level is stronger and produces longer lasting results than healing from only the astral or etheric levels. That ultimately for healing to take place in feeling and body, there has to be a change in thought too. Kind of sounds familiar, right? You must be transformed and have a whole new mind, you know, Romans 12:1, where we're saying those kind of things. And as you know, there's a whole branch of psychology, the cognitive therapies, which focus more on thought than feeling. Their assumption is that you get your head together and eventually the rest will follow. And that's true. Rational emotive therapy would be an example of this, where you're dealing more with your attitude. So that's what the mental body is concerned with, attitudes, what your attitude is, how your attitude affects your feeling. Remember, we started with that. The old man's crying. He changes the way he thinks, it changes the way he feels, it changes his body experience of energy as well. This is just a little more sophisticated way of talking about it. Finally, we could speak of a causal body, and that one is getting a little more difficult, but there are some interesting things to say about it, and I'll try to make some connections with other fields. Whereas the mental body is more concerned with the creation and transmission of concrete thoughts and ideas. In other words, we do the thinking at that level. The self is thinking. I think, therefore I am. Descartes is speaking about the mental body, okay? I control that one. The causal body is involved with the area of abstract ideas and concepts. Abstract ideas. I come into them. I gain access to them through what Lonergan would call what? Insight. Or these ideas that were falling into my mental level consciousness are coming from that level, causal level, a higher level of understanding. Causal consciousness deals with the essence of a subject while the mental level studies the subject's details. The lower mental body dwells upon the mental images obtained from the sensations and analytically reasons about purely concrete objects. But the causal body deals with the essence of substance and the true causes behind the illusion of appearances. On this plane, we no longer deal with emotions, ideas, and conceptions, but with the essence and underlying nature of the thing in question. Unlike the etheric, astral, or mental vehicles, the causal body is much more than an individual body. It is like a body in which we participate. Abstract ideas have a validity beyond our individual consciousness, right? Certainly, we can say that. Honesty, truth, justice, things like that are not just valid because we think so. They belong to a realm that is transpersonal, that envelops the whole race. Here we're talking about a level in which we participate with one another. We can access it as individuals. But on the other hand, it's not just mine, it's yours too. And we can recognize it together. Get that word, recognize. What does that mean? It means it's being, that cognition is grasping it. We've already grasped it at a higher level that you might say is intuition is the link with this causal body. But bringing it into the mental level is a recognition. It's transmuting it from an intuitive thing that we see into something that we can now conceptualize about and eventually feel about and eventually act on in our body. Okay? Just as the mental body first has its effect upon the astral, then cascades down to the etheric and physical, so the causal body has its initial input at the level of mental and then moves down the energetic scale. Thus, healing from the causal level will have the more powerful effects than integrating at the mental or lower energetic levels of body. Get yourself straight with universal principles, in other words, and your mind will function as it should. It's a way of talking about that. And if you're straight with universal principles, then you'll be feeling as you should, and your body will be as healthy as it should. There are even higher levels that can be spoken of that are beyond idea, beyond intuition, that are direct experiences of spirit, where the true form of the soul as spirit is in direct contact with this spirit who is God. And that cascades down. Now, how are these things stuck together? How do they communicate with one another? That's what we call the chakras. The chakras are these energy centers. Remember the energy centers we just got in touch with? You had a thought and you felt it kind of becoming energized in a part of your body. You might say your mental body was energizing a certain part of your physical body. When you thought about that love seed. It introduced images, feelings, physical response. So that the communication between these various bodies happens in the chakras. At the physical level, the chakras correspond to the nerve plexuses up and down the central nervous system, like so. There they are. I might say at this point that there are different ways of talking about chakras. The Buddhist system recognizes only 3 or 4. Almost everybody seems to recognize a heart chakra, a lower abdominal chakra, which is an emotional place, a sort of a feeling place here, a feeling mental place, and a brow place. Those are everywhere. You find this kind of discussion. Even in Christianity, in some of the literature of the Greek Orthodox fathers, you will find those centers referred to. And you will see them in the literature. You will see there's a, what are those things called? Good heavens, icons. There's an icon of St. Dominic where he's got this star flashing out of his forehead. And there are other saints, where you see a crown around the top, a halo. Hey, the crown chakra is open, right? There is a recognition of that reality. So at the physical level, we're talking about the nerve plexuses, which are the place where stimulus and response is going into and out of the organs of the body, the muscles, the skin, and so forth. They're coming from the brain, down the spinal cord, through the plexuses, into these areas, and they're returning into the brain. Now, if you can imagine something like that in all of those other bodies, that sort of turning and working around those nerve plexus areas, but a little more subtle. Again, there are people on this planet who can see that, can see these energy centers. And we can all certainly experience their reality in terms of the energy collecting there, just in our ordinary experiences. So the way these different bodies communicate from the body up, it begins with a sensation, goes into a plexus, and it affects the chakras, which affect the higher bodies. Then a thought will cascade down through the chakras, affecting the different bodies, ultimately affecting the physical body. So you have a correspondence between the lower and the higher going on through these chakras up and down. You get the picture? I hope. If you don't, let's stop and see if you do. I've been trying to lay this thing out and show you how it is said to work. Are we okay? Let's see if we can make a couple of other kinds of connections there. Some of this might not be too terribly different from some of the insights in modern psychology, where, for example, Jung would speak of archetypes. Might we not understand archetypes as things existing in the causal body, as basic human predispositions, as basic universal kinds of ways of being human that energize us in certain ways, that move us in certain ways? Certainly psychology has always understood that thought affects feeling and feeling affects the body. We know that. Our common language suggests that, right? That some people give us a pain in the neck. We have butterflies in our stomach, right? We know that. So-and-so makes you sick to your stomach. They do. They really do. That if you really have a lot of anger going, your heart rate will go up, right? That this energy from this astral level will cascade down and affect the physical level. That's all we're saying. If you don't want to use bodies in terms like that, think of levels. Levels of our conscious experience. An important point is to say each of these levels or bodies has its own way of knowing that's valid at that level. That the astral level, knowing in a feeling, emotional way, is valid at that level. There is a higher way of knowing at the middle level, but you can't ignore the astral. There's a way of knowing at the causal level. It's a knowing without knowing how you know. It's just knowing. I don't know how I know, but I know. That's the causal level. At that most spiritual level, we could speak of an attentional state that is pure attention, where attention exists beyond the causal. Attention exists without being, in a sense, given a form by an idea or a concept, where attention is just a direct perception of what is. That would be the soul level, where it would be cosmically attuned, be open, and where it would be informing even the causal level, where it would be informing that level. Okay. So I'll summarize that and we'll take a break. The central nervous system, and especially the endocrine system, especially the endocrine system, that most wonderful but poorly known system of the body that controls so much of sickness and health. Endocrine system, I'm speaking of the pituitary, the adrenals, the hypothalamus, all of those glands which, if not working properly, causes so much misery. That the central nervous system and the endocrine system are attuned to energies from the higher levels or bodies. They are directly affected by that. That the chakras are centers of transformation between the higher and lower bodies. That energy is transformed from the higher bodies to the lower, and it can be, when we speak of energy moving from the lower to the higher, we speak of a transmutation of energy being transmuted. And that's a common phenomenon. We eat food, the food is turned into a kind of an energy that the mind can use. That's a stepping up of energy, where it's transmuted, transformed. We can speak of energy coming down. Those two movements of energy is what we mean by yin and yang. That might be a kind of a simplification, but where energy is moving from higher levels to lower levels is the yang principle. Correct? I hope. Where energy is moving from the lower to the higher is the yin principle. The movement from spirit to matter is the yang, or male, which roughly corresponds with an incarnational movement, right? From a spirit to matter. Maybe it's not totally inappropriate that some of that language we use is male. Now, okay? And in Christianity, the counter movement from matter towards spirit is female. Guess who that one is? The Holy Spirit, right. You see? Those are the two. And in a human being who is working properly, they're working in a kind of a balance. The energy is coming down and it's going up, and it's coming down and it's going up. That's the yin and the yang. It's working on the left side and the right side of the autonomic nervous system, two ladders of nerves on either side of the spinal cord. When there's too much coming down, then the person would be sort of incarnating too much on the matter side, and sort of the yin, the yang would be below the heart, that when our energy is balanced more in the lower part of the body, when we're working out of this lower, below the heart part, we would speak of a person who is really overbalanced on yang, as men are accustomed to being accused, of course, working more out of the lower centers of power, of security, sexuality, and so forth. And when energy is more balanced on the yin side, we'd be speaking of people who are working more at the heart and above. And we could speak of the heart as the place where these two movements of energy are balanced. The place where it all comes together is the heart. Another scriptural word that begins to have new meaning here, right? So the downward principle of working on the matter side is yang, generally associated with male. I've seen a few females like that in my time as well, who are overbalanced on a yang side. We've talked about the different levels as different bodies that coexist and interpenetrate and allow a movement from up and down via the chakras and nerve plexus. And I'm going to talk about 3 principles of intercommunication. I don't have them written on anywhere, but I don't have them on a handout here, but here's the first one. Attention moves from a lower to a higher level when the work of the lower level is accomplished. Okay? That when you finish your work on a lower level, you will spontaneously move into a higher level. Probably. That's how we're created to do. That you must learn to crawl before you walk. That you must develop your body a certain amount before your mind can develop. And developmentalists such as Piaget, for example, have pointed some of this out quite well. How a sensory motor intelligence must precede a language kind of intelligence. You must have a language base before realizing and being able to own complex or abstract principles. If you come upon them, you won't be able to keep them as yours. But you need to develop your mental life to a certain level of sophistication before it can be integrated with the causal level and be in harmony with that. That your emotional level must be developed a certain amount before your mental level, and so forth. So that point, I think, is made very well by most of the developmentalists, by Piaget, by Erickson, to a certain extent by Maslow, certainly by Jane Levenger, and her theories on ego development. That's the first principle. And the final implication of it is that your mind must be at peace if the purity of spiritual attention is to be realized in the embodied state. That you must be right with the abstract principles, with the universal laws, if you're going to be able to fully incarnate. You have to be right there. So that old gift of the Ten Commandments and a teaching church and so forth plays a role there. We can see that. A second principle is that a dysfunction at a higher level brings consequences to a lower level. That negative thinking produces emotional pain, even bodily pain. That many physical disorders are manifestations of higher level disorders. People whose lives are out of sync with lawfulness, with the lawfulness of the universe. This is the meaning of the Hindu teachings on karma, which echoes very strongly with our own moral teaching in Christendom. That if you're out of sync with the law, then there will be disharmony in your life and in your family, down to the second, third, fourth generation, to your children's children and so forth. This stuff rolls on down. And so the importance of getting one's life straight with these higher universal principles. And you might see these universal principles as this causal level as a sort of a matrix in which human form is supposed to develop so that it can be truly human. However, the ultimate level beyond the causal, the level that we would call pure attention, has not been corrupted. It appears that at that level, salvation is to be found. That the corruption of the race is breaking in to the world largely through the mental and astral levels, through distorted thinking and emotional rejection, is where people are feeling screwed up and getting sick. That destruction is breaking in. And if one can somehow move beyond that, they break free, if you follow. Okay? And those levels have not been allowed corruption, that Christ has, in a sense, established a guard against a corruption at those levels. Good news, I think. Number 3, damage to a lower level impairs realization of a higher level at the lower level. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you have an accident and you destroy brain tissue, then your mental level won't be able to manifest in the body. Okay? That's all. We don't mean that. Say that's all. Damage to a lower level impairs realization of a higher level at that lower level. So, for example, I had a first cousin. He's recently died. But last year he had a stroke. And he went for a couple of minutes without breathing. And a large amount of brain tissue was destroyed. Yet, not enough for him to die. So he lived for a year in a kind of vegetative state, and then he was kind of able to wake up a little more to where he could sit up and feed himself a little bit and do a little bit, you know. And he looked like he was able to recognize voices. He would respond a little bit with his eyes. There was no doubt that there was some kind of human form that was trying to break through, you know, but the brain was just too damaged. It was too damaged. So the lower levels have to be, in a sense, in pretty good shape if a higher level will manifest through that lower level. That means, too, that don't expect to see these higher levels manifesting if the astral or the feeling level is contaminated, is troubled. Don't expect your mind to come to peace if your feelings are disturbed. You have to deal with that level. You have to deal with the feeling level. Only then can the higher level break through. Okay? That's what we're saying there. Birth defects are another case in point, you know, where the soul is not able to manifest because there is a problem at that physical level. Those three principles, I think, are pretty basic to understanding how these things work. Number one, again, attention moves from a lower to a higher level when the work of the lower level is accomplished. And I think there's a timing issue when you are ready, too, to move to the higher. And it's not a sudden awakening, you know? It's a slow, gradual. You begin to awaken to this higher level. And as you awaken to a higher level, you have a totally different experience of your humanity. You know, a baby has a very different experience. They're largely, you know, lower level kinds of humans. They're not little adults. They're a different experience of humanity than we have. Teenager is waking up more to the higher mental, bordering on causal. Natural part. Our culture brings people very, very nicely to the higher mental levels, most of the time. The plight of fallen humanity is that all people experience rejection in the womb, as early as the womb. They experience it not at a thinking level, but they experience it at the physical, etheric, and astral levels, to which the little developing fetus is alert. Studies done in clinical hypnosis, well, things that have happened spontaneously in clinical hypnosis, indicate very clearly that an intelligence is at work even in the developing fetus. They report in clinical hypnosis an awareness of the parents arguing about the pregnancy, and feeling themselves, the little mass, feeling rejected, feeling it, okay? Not knowing it through word, but it is an intelligence at that level. One reported the awareness of her mother trying to abort her, of feeling a hot, burning liquid come into the womb, feeling it touch her, but guarding herself. See? So we experience rejection early in life. And as a result of that, there is kind of a constriction of attention. Attention is manifesting through all these levels. And attention is, because the environment is not consistently loving, we're kind of on our guard, even from the womb. And certainly once we're born, we experience what we would call conditional love. And from here on, we're quite at home in Christianity and talking about the whole business. Because out of that experience of conditional love, we began to build a bit of a defense system around ourselves. We began to kind of not allow attention to relax into the body, which we would hope a baby could be able to do, is just to allow attention to relax into the physical body and etheric and above and so forth. There's this constriction of attention. And at the level of astral intelligence or emotional life, there is fear, there is shame, there's hurt, and all people have that. Everybody who is born has that to some degree. Some have much more than others. That needs to be underscored. Working with adult children of alcoholics and others, I know that many people grow up with a lot of rejection around them. And the message that they get is, for you to be accepted, you have to do certain things. You have to do the right things. Now, the mental level is quite aware that there's disturbance in the lower levels. It feels it as disharmonious vibration, feels it as pain. The mental level is the level of intellectual life, perceives the emotional level saying, I'm not okay unless. And the mental level picks up the baton and says, okay, well then we'll figure out how to make you okay. Here we have our mental level reaching the conclusion presented by the astral level, you're not okay. And the mental level is equipped, it's a very survival kind of level for us in this world, to solve problems, to understand things conceptually. It's the level that is entrusted with language. And so it begins the life project of trying to make us okay. The mental level perceives that that we are a problem, It's a problem-solving level, the intellect. What is the problem? Not life, not a situation. Me. I'm the problem. And then we're off to the races. Then we're crazy as loons, trying to make ourselves okay by doing the right things, forming some idealized picture in our minds of what a human being should be, constantly comparing ourselves with that, falling short of the mark and feeling guilty, or succeeding and feeling grandiose, neither of which is a big improvement over the other. At the mental level, our life then becomes very much concerned with learning what the right things to do are and directing our energies accordingly. This inevitably brings us out of sync with the higher level, the causal, with the universal principles. Sometimes to follow those principles means we won't be okay, means we will be rejected. For example, honesty. To be honest, which is a basic suggestion from the causal level. To be right, you have to be honest. Sometimes to be honest is the last thing to do, because that will result in more and more and more rejection. We learn that getting other people's approval is one way to do the right thing, one way to get right, one way to get loved. And so, for most people, happiness is very episodic, very conditioned, always bracketed with anxiety and fear, and always has this big superegoic, idealized self sitting on the shoulder as judge. I love this story that Ram Dass tells. He talks about a German tailor named Brambach, who makes suits. He's the best tailor in Germany. One day a man goes to see Brambach the tailor, and he wants a suit made. And so he gets measured, and they pick out a material, and a week later he goes back. The suit is made, but Brambach's ready to go on vacation. Wants to leave like now. So the man says, "Do you have my suit?" And Brambach says, "Yes, I do." "Well, I'd like to try it on." "Okay, go in the dressing room, here's your pants." So he puts on the pants, and the material is beautiful. It's a pretty good fit, except one leg's a little bit longer than the other. So he goes and shows Brambach, and Brambach looks at that and says, "Oh gosh, I'll never get rid of this guy." "All right, I'll take, yeah, I see that, but you know, if you stand like this, it works out all right. It's a pretty good fit." And so he stands like that. "Yeah, you know, you're right. It does fit." So then he puts on the coat, and it's beautiful, beautiful material. Fine sewing job, except one shoulder's a little longer than the other. Well, that's a problem too, you see. So he goes to Brambach, and he says, "Now, there's a problem with this coat too." And Brambach says, "No sweat, just stand like this, and it works out." And the guy looks in the mirror, and sure enough, it does. It works out. So he gets on the bus to go home, and there he is standing in the bus like this. And this guy says to him, "That's such a beautiful suit you have on. It must have been made by Brambach the tailor." He says, "How did you know that?" He says, "Because only Brambach could fit a cripple like you." Oh, it's so good. You see, here is the great blessing that we've been given, that at the mental level, we have been given the power to give form to our own energy through thought. That's a godly power, that through language and thought, we can give form to our physical and emotional energy. Remember, change your thought, you change your energy, right? Right. We ourselves are a thought form expressed by God, a logos with a small l, you might say. And we have been given that power, but what happens is our form, the form that we take on from the culture, is really distorted. And so we're standing in these forms like this. Our body is distorted. Our emotional energy experience is distorted. We're supposed to be standing like this, but we're not. Our vision of ourselves is distorted. And so, in standing like this, our emotional experience is distorted. And we experience that at the level of self-concept. Self-concept is the way we put ourselves together at the mental level. Okay? It's all our ideas about ourselves. And the picture of ourselves that comes out at the mental level. And for most people, the self-concept is very distorted. And they're very identified with certain ideas about themselves. They've reached conclusions about themselves. They say things like, "This is who I am." They're dead. The bodies above can't be realized very clearly. The bodies below are filled with toxin. So many people are so sick, right? How did we live like that? To live like that is to live not quite dead, not quite alive. Not quite awake, not quite asleep. That's how people live, right? It's everywhere, isn't it? One of the things we do is we use addictive fixes, and this is where addictive fixes comes in. We're in this pain. We've put ourselves together mentally in a distorted way that ultimately keeps us in pain. We've taken on life projects that are largely about trying to make us okay. We're doing "I'll be okay when" with our heads, and our feelings are doing "I'm not okay." We're trying to make ourselves okay with approval, control, perfection, success. And we're getting more miserable as we do it. And so the fix is just a way to kind of get out of it for a little while, to get out of that rat race mentality. The fix is a way of connecting these levels for a brief period of time in some kind of a harmonious state. Heard many stories of people who, let's say parents were alcoholics, and the first time they drank, they felt like a whole person. That the three lower levels, physical, mental, and emotional, were in a kind of a harmony, but the context was alcohol. So they drank more. Ultimately, more destruction on those levels, because it didn't resolve the basic issue, which is you're standing like this in life. You're out of touch with universal principles. And so your soul, which is even beyond that, cannot be realized in your body, and you're miserable. How do we get out of that? There are different answers to this, of course, and there is no one answer. But certainly, one thing we have to say is you have to do your work, and you have to be prepared to work hard. There is a grace that is there for those who are willing, but nevertheless, there is some work to be done. Both East and West say the way out is first of all to see the predicament you're in. See what you're doing. See that you are caught. This is echoed in the first step of the 12 steps, recognizing your powerlessness and unmanageability, not with judgment. Just see it. See how you have been hurt. See how in response to that you have taken a posture toward life that has distorted you, distorted your attention, limited your experience. See? The way out is to give up the addictive fix, because it keeps you locked into that context of harmony, that artificial context. Give it up. Well, what do you think an ego thinks about that? Hey, Humpty Dumpty's going to have a great fall, right? We give that up. That may well be some of the scariest part of the whole thing, is the starting off, is to say, wait a minute, I've learned to hold myself together like this and keep myself going like this, and now you're telling me that I have to give that up. And quite frankly, some people are not ready to hear that. They need to hurt a little more, we say. But when we are ready, it's still hard to do. Both East and West say you have to resolve your emotional issues. If there is hatred, it has to be resolved in a forgiveness process. If there is guilt, there needs to be amends made. Again, the 12 steps provide a process for that for the West. It's there in our traditional spirituality as well. The Eightfold Path of Buddhism has things like that. Hinduism recognizes that as well. These are basic spiritual insights. Resolve your emotional issues. Now, those are the three most difficult things, what I've just said. Easily, three most difficult. And I'll say in a minute about how in the West that happens in a context of a relationship with God that is different from the context of the East. That is how we begin to clear at the mental and astral levels. At the mental level, we begin to see things honestly. We begin to call a spade a spade. And it's a good thing. When a mental level begins to act honestly, it begins to connect with the higher level. Begins to feel some strength, some energy coming from that higher level. It has to feel its pain, but if it works a forgiveness process, it begins to feel relief. A lot of our emotional pain is healed in two ways. Look at them get their pencils. First, through tears is one way that that system is cleared. And we don't always know what those tears are about. I shared that with you, that in my own experience, I didn't know what it was about. And I think the reason I didn't know is because there wasn't an issue to resolve with someone. If my pain would have been, for example, about something I did wrong to a family member, I would have had that memory because the healing of that pain would have meant get straight with that family member, Then the pain will be healed because they're bound in a sense by that pain too. But if it's just old junk, old poison at that level, it'll come out with tears. It'll also come out with a kind of a breath called apana, a hot, short breath. It's an astral body level breath. That at the level of astral body, there's a breath we call pranic and a breath that's aponic. And you can feel that kind of breath. It's a hot kind of breath. It's feel like something is letting go in your stomach, that kind of breath. Other things that both East and West say is we have to improve our diet. What does that do? Well, you got to have a healthy body, right? Right. You have to learn to meet your needs non-egoically. Up until now, we've learned to meet our needs in a context of success, approval, control, perfection, self-sufficiency, and so forth. Learning to meet your needs non-egoically means a whole different way of being. We'd have to learn how to rest in silence, in a silence that is beyond thought. East and West have some different ideas about that. We have to learn to live by universal principles. A good statement of these universal principles would be the 4th through 10th of the 10 Commandments. Actually, with the exception of Buddhism, which wouldn't have very much to do with 1, 2, and 3, all the rest of the world would say amen to the 10 Commandments. They're basic statements about what is necessary to find harmony at the causal level. The consequence of doing these things that I've mentioned, see the predicament you're in, giving up your addictive fix, resolve your emotional issues, improve your diet, learn to meet your needs properly, learn to rest in silence, be in good, healthy relationships, is a kind of a natural harmony, a kind of a natural union in which, through all of these levels, we experience peace. And the lower can manifest the higher, and there can be the return. The yin and the yang can flow freely. A natural union, the natural union that the soul has with God by virtue of the fact that it is created by God and is given existence by God. In theology, we call that contingency, that the soul doesn't have a life apart from God. It is a creation of God. This natural union, I believe, and Jim will talk more about that, is what the Zen people would call enlightenment, and the Hindu people would call Satchitananda, being knowledge bliss. It is a kind of union that can be realized if we do the right spiritual work. Now, I've just said a mouthful, and I realize that there have been big conferences on East-West dialogue that would want to clarify every word that I've just said, but that's just kind of what I believe at this point. It's a hunch that I have, but I certainly stand to be corrected about that. It is to say that there is a return that is possible, and that return to a natural union, a natural harmony between the soul and these levels, the soul, which is a created spirit that is manifesting through these lower body forms, that is possible, that kind of return is possible. And I think Catholic theology would agree with that. In fact, I know it would. Okay? The result, as I say, is this natural union. The experience of this natural union is, I'm here. That was what I began to experience with the breath stoppage and the ecstasies and so forth in the beginning of the lights and stuff around 1985, 86. The I who is here was the one that's beyond all this, the one that is straight from the hand of God, the spiritual I, that has no form, but that is taking form in these lower levels. That when those levels began to clear, I'm here. Like I said, it doesn't sound like a big deal, right? It's a beautiful experience to be able to say, I'm here. And not define that any further, because the mental level would want to say, who is here? And then you're back into self-concept, you see? That's its way of answering the question. At the higher level, who is here? You would say, I am. When they would ask the Buddha, for example, who are you? What was his answer? I am awake. Seems to be a non-answer, but it's a profound answer. It's a, I am. Let's bring this a little more into the Catholic tradition, okay? St. Thomas Aquinas speaks of two kinds of things, right? Essence and existence. Y'all know what that means, huh? Existence is the fact that something is. It is. It exists. Essence is what it is. A person, a tree, not just a person, a tree. This person, Benny, this person, Judy. Essence, a human essence as that person. It's the individualization of the existent. The two are connected, but they're different. To say I exist, and then to answer the question, who exists? Bill St. Romain, who is blah, 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 and you go on to self-concept. Two different things. And I think that natural union comes out of doing that work. Well, I won't belabor that because Jim will do a whole day on that, and you can save all your questions for him, including the ones you want to ask me about all that. But what I'm saying is that there is an awakening that is possible in the East, and a liberation from that terrible predicament that we would call ego. It is a very hard journey, this Eastern journey. It takes a lot of commitment and a lot of resolve, but it is a possible one. And the result is this beautiful experience, which may be the experience that Adam and Eve enjoyed, the experience of this natural harmony between the creature and God. Well, is that what Christianity is doing? The answer is yes, and the answer is no. It's doing that, and it's doing something else. What is it doing? The Christian way of liberation from this is that Christ, who is the source of all, through him all things were made, himself takes on a human form in the person of Jesus. That this man, Jesus, who is of a level far beyond this, becomes incarnated, a real yang movement into the body, really an incarnation, where God becomes human, and where the two natures, the God and the human, are one. They're fused. An infusion of God into a human nature. And this Jesus becomes bonded with us and our race in love, and stands with us, and communicates to us his own knowledge of God. That the Christian journey is not merely a return to a natural state of union. It is an invitation to that, yes, which, by the way, not too many come to. Because before that, even before that is realized, one can begin to experience not a natural union, but Christ's love for the person and then his own love for the Father. That this man, Jesus, who becomes human, becomes involved with us in a relationship of love. And through that relationship of love, communicates to us his energy, bonds himself with us, takes our form into his hands, and remakes us. It's a different project he's onto. The gift that he gives us in doing so is not just a healing, but also a new possibility. The possibility of his own knowledge of the Father. And so when he says, no one comes to the Father except he comes through me, he is saying what is most unique about Christianity, is that only he knows the Father in the Trinity, in the nature of the Godhead. Only he knows that. And so only he can communicate that. Only he can transform the soul, remake it, as it were, so that it too can know that. A new possibility. Not just a return to the original state of the first parents, but a raising up of the race. So even though one is in the ego, and even though one is screwed up, one can know that one is loved by God and feel that at the astral level, at the mental level, at the physical level. One can know that this perfectly healed, whole, integrated, risen, ascended Jesus takes this into his own body, especially through Eucharist, and transforms it, heals it slowly. And here I think we have to say something about Eucharist, that the full realization of this seems to happen most in people who are of a Eucharistic spirituality. It is observed in Protestantism, but not as frequently as in the Catholic and other traditions that are Eucharistic, Roman Catholic and others. Because I think here in the Eucharist we find Christ really bonding with us at all the levels, at the physical, at the astral, and so forth. And he works with our levels. If we're doing our work too, remember you have to do your work, but he yokes himself with us. He lets us know his love, even when we're screwed up. He lets us know his peace, even though we're screwed up. We don't have to wait until everything is clear before you know that. My own story is testimony to that, what I shared with you this morning. For years I walked with, the I centered on the lower levels, knowing in the lower levels that I was loved, that there was God. And the end result, if we continue on the journey, is that when we return to this natural union, we enjoy that harmony, an embodied soul. We enjoy that incarnational wholeness. But there's something else that is there. And that something else is Jesus' own knowledge of the Father, which is a relational, personal love experience felt at the level of the heart. And that really is hard to describe what that is. How do you describe love? How do you define love? It's real though, isn't it? It's real. It touches all the levels. So it's a different journey, and it brings about a different quality of return. And this is not to say that it's better than the East or anything like that, but it certainly is a different kind of invitation, very different invitation. The Holy Spirit then becomes our experience not only of Jesus' love for me, which is his human love for me, person to person. He loves me. And you know when someone loves you, you can feel it. But the Holy Spirit is his love for the Father and the Father's love for him. In Christianity, we call this a covenantal relationship of covenant, a bond. We come back to our existential union in the context of relationship, and arriving there, discover that there is still a possibility of relationship. There is still an I, there is still a thou. The thou is not an invention of the conceptualizing intellect, as the Zen people sometimes say. It is a reality of an other who we can know and love. Okay, that's heavy. And that's why we have other presenters who will develop different parts of this more and more. What does this all have to do with Kundalini? I'll say a little bit about that, then we'll take a break. As we make the journey, our experience of energy obviously changes. When we're really on the mental, emotional level, we have a different kind of experience than we do when we're babies. The feeling is our experience of energy is much heavier, much more laden with feeling. As one moves on the journey from the lower levels to the higher, to the causal, for example, at the causal level, the experience of energy is quite different than it is at the mental level. There's still feeling, but it's not as heavy. It's a little more subtle, a little more attuned, to some finer kinds of things, a little more perceptive as well. At the higher levels, feeling itself becomes so refined, so very subtle. Energy becomes so refined. Kundalini energy is the experience of energy we have in the body, coming into the body and returning, when attention breaks free even from its attachment to causal level issues, where finally attention can rest in the now without thinking, without referring principles to itself, without conceptualizing, without running through a vision of life and all of that, where one can just be here now. What is the experience of energy? Kundalini. That's the answer. Where feeling and so forth, now you have a very rarefied, subtle, pure kind of energy that one experiences. And it's moving both ways. It's moving from the higher on down, and it's returning from the body on up. That's Kundalini. How do we define that? Well, again, I've just given you a big context, a way of talking about it. You see on the front part, and I'll stop after this, on your handout package, that there are some statements about Kundalini from some Eastern masters. Quite obviously, I would take exception with some of what they say, but by and large, I'm in total agreement. The one I like best is Lillian Silburn's. Kundalini, the upright axis at the innermost center of a person and of the universe, is the very source of man and woman's might, drawing and unfolding all energies. It's the mother source of all energies, the basic soul energy that is becoming embodied. Although she may be experienced with great intensity and bring about remarkable effects, Kundalini cannot be grasped nor described by the intellect. Why? Because the intellect is right there. It's at a lower level. The intellect is in a dialectical relationship with feeling. This energy is about being formed by a higher level, which the intellect cannot see. Whole volumes on this subject fail to convey the slightest idea of what she really is. She, that's a yin, huh? And yet, to those who experience her, she is as simple as life. Better still, she is the very source of all life. But how to define life? Well, we'll leave that question there then, right? The only part I would have to take some exception to would be the one by Swami Muktananda, where in his first part, his top paragraph, he says, in Japanese it is called ki, in Chinese chi, and the scriptures of Christianity call it the Holy Spirit. Well, I say no. And I'm on record in my book saying no, the Holy Spirit is, properly speaking, Christ's love bond with the Father, which we are privileged to be given. It is a gift. In Judeo-Christianity, this would be called Ruah, a sacred breath that is still part of our experience. I would be a little happier if he had used Ruah than Holy Spirit. Although do note that when Jesus gives the Holy Spirit, what does he do? He breathes it onto them. But it is whose breath? It is his breath that he's breathing, you see, and that's what Pentecost is. His breath, which becomes mixed with our prana, or our sacred breath, and allows us to be energized and spiritualized, in a sense, in his form. Okay, so there's some insights there, and especially I like the one at the bottom on energia and entelekia, some old philosophical terms that take on some meaning in the light of Kundalini. So this is the energy that the soul form works with. It is the energy that we have when we're awake at the level of soul. It can be manifesting through the astral and through the mental and physical and so forth. And it does. There are feelings and certainly thoughts and things like that. It is being transmuted into those lower levels, but it can also be experienced in its purest form as just basic life energy, just basic life. Very subtle, no great big emotional thing, but very beautiful. Several practical things. Number one, this energy that we call Kundalini, the energy that is the pure experience of energy when one is awake in the soul level. How does one experience energy in the body? That is that energy. Kundalini, that is a correspondence between the soul level and the body level. That connects them, that keeps the chakras clear, that keeps the other bodies awake, so one can be fully alive as a soul in this body. How is this energy awakened? And I would like to say a few things about that. There are many ways it is awakened, or at least aroused. First of all, I make a distinction between an arousal and an awakening. An arousal would be when we experience the energy for a short period of time, and then it kind of goes away. When the energy would, in a sense, illuminate the higher centers or chakras, and then drop on down. This is probably a very common phenomenon that people on the spiritual journey will experience from time to time, in connection perhaps with some prayer, a retreat, laying on of hands, something like that. But that's an arousal. And in looking back on my own journey, I see that there were many arousals, times when I felt energized and awake all the way to the top, but then I'd kind of go back to what we might call my old self. My center of gravity was still very much in the lower levels. It was kind of between a mental causal level, somewhere between that, when the eye was still below the neck. An awakening is when the energy is, there is the continuous movement of the energy from the bottom toward the top. When it looks like the fountain is turned on and it's not turned off, that's an awakening. Where it's constantly pushing upwards, constantly, where something has been triggered, some switch has been turned on, and it doesn't turn off. How to awaken? See, I'm not going to talk about arousal, although these may result in arousals. I think the best way for Kundalini to awaken is to simply live the Christian life, to simply walk the walk, to pray as one prays, to begin with sacred reading and meditation. If one's prayer moves beyond into a more quiet, contemplative love bond with God, to allow that to happen, to allow one's healings to take place as the result of making amends and reconciling in relationships, that to allow the energy to awaken spontaneously as a result, a natural result of one's growth. That is, to me, the best way and the safest way. And even there can be some problems. But when the energy awakens, one will have developed enough on the higher levels as a result of that to be able to integrate it without too much of a problem. That's more or less the story in my case. However, you can tell that there were problems, largely resulting from ignorance. Traditional Christianity in the stages of prayer would have this. Buddhism, I believe, is also a similar kind of journey. The Eightfold Path outlines a pathway for a gradual growth process that works on the whole person and all the different levels at once. And when the energy would awaken, one would be prepared. The vessel, as it were, would be able to contain the elixir that would be poured into it. Vedanta Hinduism is another example where one is is not really working too much with, to activate the energy centers. One is working more on thought and attitude, their relationship with feeling, relationships, and so forth. That's the best way to ascend the chakras on the spiritual journey, and to do so gradually. A second way that Kundalini is awakened is through Hatha and Kundalini Yoga, where one is working directly with these lower levels, with the physical body, etheric body, and astral body. And one is working using breath and posture to produce more energy there. It's a sort of though you're producing more and more energy on these lower levels, and eventually, like a geyser, it will shoot up that central channel into the higher levels. So through breath and posture, especially certain postures of sitting, breathing, breath cessation, keeping the spine straight. There are different mudras, different locks that one can do. Working with energy. They work with form also. They work with thought, and they work with attitude, and they would all say in these yogas that one's life should be governed by moral principles, and they would all emphasize that preparation, but their focus would be on energy. Sort of awaken the energy and let it push you into the form. And the other way is say, work on the form and allow the energy to come on up to greet it. Okay? That's two different ways. I think the working on the form side is a little safer. There can be problems with that approach I just mentioned. What if the energy is awakened, not just aroused, and one's not ready? What if your mental level is not ready? What if your thinking is not ready? What if your lifestyle is not ready? You can hurt yourself a lot. Here you have an energy suitable for another kind of person, and you're not ready. A woman called me last week who had such an experience. She experienced what we call a Shaktipat. We talk about that as a third way to awaken Kundalini. Would be a special touch received from an awakened master. A touch that perhaps really ought to be what confirmation is about, the meaning of that. A touch that Jesus communicated, certainly at Pentecost, where the way Swami Muktananda would put it, the energy of the Guru is the same as the Guru, communicates in the sense the person of the Guru. To be touched by that energy awakens that kind of energy in oneself. This woman went on a workshop given by Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, and she was in a very deep state of depression. I won't give you all the background. She was very, very down and was thinking about suicide, but figured that Elisabeth Kubler-Ross could help her to understand what might happen if she committed suicide. Okay? Because Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, as you know, works with dying people and has written books on that. And during the course of the workshop, after talking with her a while, Elisabeth grabbed her arm and said, "I think our journeys are going to be together." Well, no big deal. The woman went back home, which of all places was Baton Rouge, where I used to live. I never knew any of these people in Baton Rouge. And she began to have all kinds of bizarre phenomena happening to her. She woke up that night and there was a blue body standing at the foot of her bed saying, "We need to get together. We need to work together." This is the way the astral body is frequently perceived. These blue lights is an astral level kind of experience. But she was so disconnected from that that it was literally unable to exist in her physical body. So the Shaktipat had awakened her to higher levels of energy experience that were suitable for those forms, but not for the form she was in. She lost 30 pounds in 3 weeks. She had crazy dreams. She was profoundly depressed and ecstatically joyful. In fact, one of Gopi Krishna's most unique insights is that much of what we call manic depression may be exactly that, may be a Kundalini that has awakened in a person who's not prepared, and so the energy goes into the brain in unbalanced form and overstimulates certain parts of the brain. And how do you turn the switch off? Shakti means energy, and Pat means a touch, an energy touch, Shakti Pat, an energy touch. That is a form of energy transmission used in a form of yoga called Siddha Yoga. Now, usually the master does not communicate the the energy in that way until he or she feels that the disciple is ready and has done their work at the attitude with body, diet, and so forth. Then they will communicate the energy. Boy, we need to look at that when we think about confirmation, about what's supposed to be happening when that bishop slaps that person on the face, huh? You think that might have gotten lost through the years? The way that the energies can be communicated from some interesting things happen here, where the guru can send his or her Shaktipat through a designated person to another. And that person will not be affected by it. Sort of a typhoid Mary syndrome, I guess you'd say, but on the energy level. The way that Christ can send his energy through bishops and so forth. So that's a third way, but there are some consequences, again, if one is not prepared. So I certainly don't advocate that. Somebody wrote to me, a few weeks ago and wanted to know if I could give him a Shaktipat. And I have never felt moved or led in that direction. My suggestion is still, travel the journey and let Jesus do it when the time is right. And I wrote back to him and suggested again that he do exactly that or get involved in a prayer group or something like that. A fourth way is Zen. I believe that many people who practice Zen will come to a time when they have energy uprisings. Because after all, in Zen, they're moving up this scale to experience a kind of a state that is not conceptually formed, sort of an experience of one at a level of existence. And so there would be an energy that would be appropriate to that experience, and frequently people who practice Zen do have energy uprisings, energy upheavals. They have their own way of integrating that. They work with it in a different way than the yoga people do, generally by not getting too involved with it and letting it do its work and letting it not identifying much with it. Drugs are another way. Sometimes people who take drugs have Kundalini awakenings, and they again are not always a pleasant experience. Now, what most of these things have in common, but I think the trigger is, for the awakening of Kundalini, is that one reaches a state in which there is not much thought going on in the mind, where there's not much thinking happening. And so when, for example, one is in a state where there is not much thinking, either because you've done some breathing exercises or because you're in a state of contemplative love that is beyond words, where there's not much thinking, some signal is given, some switch is turned on where a new energy process kicks into gear, where energy that was largely emotional or feeling begins to be transmuted into this higher level kind of energy. The switch is turned on. I see that this was exactly the case in my own journey, that through repeated resting and quiet, eventually the switch was turned on. And then you have to be able to work with that when it happens. Something of the same thing happens in these yogas, something of the same thing happens in Zen, something of the same thing happens in drug experiences and so forth. So a real question might be interesting to explore is, how does one stop thought? And it seems that there are two ways. One is by moving beyond thought through a loving kind of union where there's nothing left to say, there's nothing left to think. That one might move beyond thought through love, or one might move beyond thought through what we would call dissociation from thought, where attention would be deliberately extricated from thought and dissociated, disidentified with thinking patterns. Both can produce an awakening of Kundalini. This should tell us something about Kundalini. This should tell us that it is a very special kind of energy. But it should tell us that it is an energy that belongs in the realm of our human experience, that it is a human energy that is appropriate to a high level of form realization or soul awakening, and that we can learn more about this energy, how the switch goes on, how to work with it safely. We can learn a lot about that. We can learn that Kundalini is the energy that is sort of built into our nature, that when the time is right and the switch goes on, I think the thoughtlessness is an indication that we have reached a level of growth where we're ready for this energy to happen. That's sort of like the way I see it. And so the energy arises to help us to be awake constantly in those higher states. It is an energy that is about re-engineering the body, rewiring things so that we can live in a higher state of consciousness. This helps us to make some distinction then between Kundalini energy and the Holy Spirit and spirituality. That the Holy Spirit can be experienced before one has a Kundalini awakening. The Holy Spirit can be experienced in the lower levels as the love, this mysterious love that we experience for God and in our own being. The Holy Spirit can bring us into the place in the journey where Kundalini awakens, but it may not be that way for everyone. Again, the business of Kundalini is to help us to stay awake and be integrated in higher states of consciousness. Where I see the New Age making a big mistake is in associating spirituality with what I have just said. That what spirituality is about is growing into higher states of consciousness. I have a problem with that. I don't think that's what spirituality is at all. Spirituality is about loving one another, love of God. It's about living in a life of love that may or may not lead to higher states of consciousness. So I would like to begin to kind of bring to a conclusion some of this by showing you this little graph that maybe puts some things together. Traditionally, the Catholic mystics have talked about the spiritual journey as a movement of union, a union between God and the soul. A union, and they use these words for stages, but everybody recognizes that the stages are a continuum. They're not steps that you walk down, and you move gradually from one to the other, but yet there are some different kinds of experiences. Traditionally, the three stages of union with God have been described as purgative, illuminative, unitive. Purgative, illuminative, and unitive have to do with will and attention. How am I united with God at the level of will and attention? Attention being will-focusing awareness. Purgative means there is a union that's there, but there's a lot of self-will in the person. I'm connected with God, but there's still a large part of me that wants it my way. There's a real civil war going on between me and God. There's a real awareness that God's will and my will are not the same thing. But at the purgative, there is still a real desire to, well, I want to do away with that. I want to do God's will more. The illuminative is where that level of union is deepening. Virtue is becoming more habitual. One's attitude is becoming more harmonious with will. And unitive would be a state where the will, the will of the person and the will of God, were in a real harmony and correspondence. Okay? So 3 levels. That is how, at least the Catholic tradition, and I'm sure the Protestants as well, would recognize the spiritual journey is to be more about that. We can see that there is another journey that is about moving up states of consciousness, about awakening more and more in the different levels, about ascending the chakras, awakening the full potentialities of the human person. Are these two things the same thing? I don't think they are. Here's one example. It appears that there are some people who can be awake in the higher levels, but who are about no good. Even in Hinduism, they recognize the existence of what they call black Kundalini and red Kundalini. That the awakening of the higher powers of the person doesn't mean you're going to be a good fellow. In fact, Gopi Krishna talks about some people for whom Kundalini is awake at birth, as it is for most children. It's the energy that pushes us into growth, and it kind of shuts down around adolescence. But that it continues to be active to awaken great genius in people. It is the energy that awakens genius, is the energy that is responsible for activating the brain in prodigies, idiot savants, and so forth. Hitler, you might say, was a person with an awakened Kundalini, a really highly energized third eye, able to communicate his energy, to the masses, and certainly through speech as well, through the throat chakra. But what kind of energy was that? What was the fruit of that? Great charismatic leaders are apparently people who have awakened Kundalini. Charles Manson, another. You can look at Charles Manson's picture and oh, there's something strange about that guy, right? That's an awakened third eye, maybe even crown kind of experience. The eyes are communicating something there. But you know that it doesn't feel very harmonious, does it? So that's one example. It's possible to ascend the chakras, or even to be born in a situation where they stay pretty awake, but not to have the white light or the Christ light kind of energy working. You might look at the world system as inviting one to about a third chakra level of growth that is just outside the spiritual journey. Third chakra would be to be awake, at the level of power, control, awake at the level of pleasure and emotion, awake at the level of security and grounding, so forth. That the world system is about that, pleasure, security, and power. How often we've heard that. So the world invites you to this. You might see that there are saints who awaken beyond that, to awaken in a heart level, and realize the unitive state in this world, but do not awaken in the higher chakras. They're awake at the heart. I mean, we have some saints out there that were profoundly charitable people, but they didn't have much going intellectually, right? There are some like that. There are some saints who had psychic gifts that are more indicative of higher chakra awakenings, and some who didn't. The important thing in Christianity is faith and love. The faith and love may lead one to the awakening of the higher levels, and one may not reach that. You might see St. Teresa's mansions as an attempt to say that. And isn't it curious how she comes up with 7 mansions? That she's got both going on. And she's trying to say something about them together. But she always leaves us quite clear that it's not necessary to live in the 5th, 6th, and 7th mansions. That those kinds of things are of special graces. Not all are going to do that. The important thing is to live the life of faith and love, which is largely out of the heart, and the intellectual conviction too, of course, has got to be part of that. So those are some distinctions that I like to make. And I like to say that the Holy Spirit is much more concerned with bringing us into the unitive state. Having been brought there, it may well be that the deepening of this unitive state will result in the awakening of higher states of consciousness. That was the answer that St. Teresa gave. Why then should one want that? Well, to love God more. Why go into those greater mansions? To love God and to know God more. To actualize the fullest of your human potential in a surrender to God. To surrender to God fully in all the chakras. Maybe this chakra business gives us a whole new way of saying, how can we love God with our whole heart, whole soul, whole mind, whole strength? How can you love God with your first chakra, second chakra, third chakra, fourth chakra, fifth chakra, and so forth? How can one be surrendering out of that? Another way to talk about that. The Kundalini is a movement toward a larger, wider experience of attention, greater inner freedom, some psychic powers, a different experience of God, kind of a deepening of one's experience of God. It can happen with that. And a real freedom in relationships, to not get hooked at the level of thought and feeling with others, to be able to be loving and detached. Those have been some of the main things. A real healing and freedom from shame and fear, anger, resentment, guilt, loneliness. Those things have been healed. What I say again, the mistake that I think the New Age, again, not all the New Age, but that line of the New Age that would tend to say that spirituality is about growing into higher states of consciousness, to equate that, to say that the Holy Spirit is just a metaphorical way, a religious metaphor for the awakening of Kundalini. That's the true reality. I know from my own prayer that this is not true. You see, I am quite able in prayer to concentrate on the energy and be nowhere with God, to sit there for half an hour and just, let's say there's a blocked area, to really get my attention into that and moving beyond it, and there'll be a kind of a sense of wholeness. You know, I think that, but as far as an awareness of God and God's love for me and all, nothing at all is coming out of that, you know, unless God zaps me. But I'm not asking or disposing myself to receive that. Probably one of the greatest implications from this is that one's practice is terribly important. That if one's spiritual practice is about sitting around and trying to get more awareness and higher consciousness, there's no guarantee that you'll experience God in that. You can come to that natural union or existential union with God, which is a kind of experience of God, but you won't have that relational, covenantal love sense of God. To have that, the attitude we must take in prayer is, here I am, Lord. I come to do your will. Or our Father who art in heaven, our Creator who art in heaven, where we are relating, where we're bringing a quality of relatingness into our spiritual practice, not just a quality of beingness. See? So I've experienced the distinction very, very clearly in my own life, that you can have higher states of consciousness, and the way you're practicing and dealing with that, you know, you can become just more self-focused in a sense at a higher state, and not have much of a sense of relationship with God. And I've certainly experienced that at lower levels, you're quite able to have an experience of God as well. You don't have to wait till you're awake, till your crown chakra is open to know God, in other words.